The qualities of effective assessment system. The last module looked at the steps that developers can take to embed continuous improvement within their assessment procedure. This module examines in more detail the qualities of a good system of assessment, the characteristics that users look for when choosing assessment or that educators look for when evaluating an assessment system. In other words, the characteristics that make the assessment useful. Four qualities of useful assessment: beneficial consequences, validity, reliability, practicality. The four elements represented in Figure 4.1 represent a broad but by no means universal consensus on the essential qualities that make up useful language assessment system. I would not wish to downplay the importance of other qualities that have been proposed, such as authenticity, Bachman and Palmer 1996, or absent of bias, Cunan 2004, which are discussed in Module 7. But I would argue that they are reasonably well accounted for within this four quality framework, representing the four qualities in Figure 4.1 in the form of a cone with practicality at the base and beneficial consequence at the top is intended to convey something about the relationship between them. Practicality is found at the base because it is a necessary condition for all assessment, and practical assessment will simply not survive for very long whatever its other distinction. Beneficial consequences that may flow from use of a language assessment are at the effects of the cone because they are the ultimate objective of any assessment system. This hope for consequence may include teaching and learning becoming more effective, opportunities opening up for language learners, and employers finding suitably qualified staff to carry out linguistically demanding tasks. Their position in Figure 4.1 reflects that they are supported by the other qualities. Beneficial consequences are not guaranteed by the presence of the other three qualities, but are very unlikely to follow if an assessment system lack practicality, reliability, and validity. Movement up the cone also represent increasing controversy. Judging the practicality of an assessment system is a relatively straightforward matter. Its validity and consequence will be much more open to dispute. Practicality. Practicality was described by Bachman and Palmer 2010 as the difference between the resources that will be required in the development and use of an assessment and the resources that will be available for these activities. It is self-evident that an assessment that lacks resources will not be suitable if there is not enough time, equipment, money, or expertise to operate an assessment. It may never be used and certainly will not survive in use for very long. In reality, assessment is always in competition for resources. In any language teaching organization, informal assessment in the classroom has to compete for time and attention with other day-to-day activities, while at the more formal, summative end of the continuum, assessment has to compete for funding with libraries, computers, software, teacher salaries, and all the other essential requirements for a functioning school, college, or national education system. Where quality assessment is made a priority, resources can often be found to support it. Practicality can be thought about in terms of efficiency, the extent to which the commitment of resources to a system of assessment is justified by the benefits it brings. As is as in other areas of expenditure, assessment choice involve a complex balancing of benefits and costs. As Ware 1993 put it, we have to be sure that the tasks we are using are the most efficient way of obtaining the information we need. Equally, it is important to ensure that all the of the activities involved in an assessment, including development, scoring, giving feedback, reporting results, and monitoring quality, are taken into account and that they are carried out as efficiently as possible. Educational manager need to weigh up the gain from investing in assessment against the other demands on their budget. Teachers need to think about how much of the limited time they have with their students should be spent on assessment and how best to integrate and balance this with other activities. Assessment system cannot and should not continue to be used unless a compelling case can be made that the benefits of maintaining them outweigh the costs. It's not easy to find the right balance. Teacher may enthusiastically take up new ideas only to find that they cannot keep up with the additional workload, or they may resist new forms of assessment because they worry that the new system might involve extra tasks that they cannot fit into their already busy schedules. Often managers underestimate the amount of time and the commitment of resources required to support good quality system and so fail to invest enough. Alternatively, they may overestimate the costs, conclude that they are prohibitive, and fail to invest at all. Many assessment projects fail because planning only allows for the cost of development and not the substantial additional resources needed to keep the system going. It can be difficult to persuade managers and policymakers that it is not enough just to be seen to have a test or assessment in place. That it is vital that it should also be useful as a bias for making informed decisions about assessees. Making it useful will mean allowing for the ongoing costs involved in maintaining, supporting, and improving it. As with other areas of policy, good quality assessment often relies on energetic individuals who are prepared to argue for funding, demonstrate the value of good practice, cri- criticize a bad practice, and recognize what is and is not achievable in their working context. Table 4.1 suggests a list of illustrative practical issues that may constrain an assessment development and therefore need to be taken into account. Bachman and Palmer 2010, Brown 2005, Bach 2009. These are organized in relation to the rules identified in Module 2. Judgment about how best to allocate resources usually bring with them disagreement and political controversies. In addition to what he called resource constraint of the kind presented in Table 4.1, Back 2009 observed that there are often additional system constraints imposed by establishing working practice and cultural issue. In some places, performance is traditionally reported in terms of percentage, while in others, teachers tend to use letter grades, certain approach to assessment, and certain item formats are favored in some countries, but rejected in others. Multiple choice question and standardized examination are well established in Turkey, for example, but are seen a controversial in the Russian Federation, where assessment by teacher using performance assessment in this tradition, it will generally be less continuous to go along with local expectation than to try to take a different direction. Advances in computer technology have made some techniques, such as controlling and timing the delivery of assessment, more practical. They have opened up opportunities to capture more kinds of data, such as how long each assessee takes to respond to each item. However, different software platforms also impose their own limitation. It will not be possible to deliver ideas for innovative task format if the software lacks the functionality, and some techniques are actually easier to manage on paper. Problems with software are with the logistic of delivering materials to large number of assessee by computer have put unexpected end to many otherwise promised projects. While it is not possible for any assessment to be reliable, valid, or beneficial if it is not sufficiently practical to get off the ground, it is quite possible to have a practical assessment on that it is administratively manageable that has very little to recommend in its terms of other qualities. In fact, such assessments are all too common, as Baker 1989 rather cynically expressed in its relation to end of year examination. All that is necessary it is the exam be difficult or traumatic and have some venue relationship to the course the learners have followed. Very often, in situations where assessments are used, no information is ever collected that would allow users to tell whenever they have any of the qualities that might make them useful. It seems to be enough that the student answer question and that grades or score are awarded, even if nobody can explain what this might actually mean. Reliability. We use various tools every day to measure aspects of the world around us. Clocks to measure time, scale for weight, thermometers for temperature, and so on. When we use them, we want to know that we can interpret these tools consistently. If the time on your watch was sometimes the same as the clock on the wall and sometimes very different, or if your scales told you that 1 liter of water weighed 500 grams in the morning and 2 kilograms in the afternoon, you would reasonably conclude that they were faulty and would not trust what they told you. Of course, many of the tools we do use every day are not very accurate, but they are good enough for our purposes. We generally get to meeting on time. We measure our ingredients and cook food at a suitable temperature. Much more precise tools are available, but there is trade-off between precision and cost. Accuracy is expensive. Most people don't mind arriving a little early or late for a meeting and barely notice if the temperature in the room is 1 or 2 degrees warmer or cooler than is displayed on the thermometer. Measurement of time, temperature, or weight involve tangible qualities that most people do not find controversial. Language ability is a much more slippery and less certain concept. In most approach to language assessment, it is assumed that language abilities represent a kind of mental trait or attribute. Similar to physical traits such as height or weight, we often describe people as having more or less language ability in rather the same way as we describe them as being tall or short. Anyone comparing fluent speaker with learners just beginning to grapple with a language may have little difficulty in accepting this idea. On the other hand, all language learners know that they are better at coping with some situations than others. Those who have studied the language as an academic subject to a high level often struggle to communicate when they first travel to a country where that language is spoken. Those who learn a language in the country becoming fluent through interaction with friends and neighbors may have more difficulty with formal written language. In these circumstances, it is more difficult to judge who has the greater language ability. For this reason, it may make more sense to conceive of many different kinds of language ability, depending on the social purpose of which the language will be used. The development of assessment of language for business or for medical or academic or other specific purposes reflect this point of view. In any case, it has to be acknowledged that we are simply not in a position to measure language abilities with the same precision that we can achieve for weight of temperature. Even very best language assessment cannot come close to the consistency and accuracy of watch or scales. It is inevitable that the estimation of language abilities will involve substantial uncertainty or measurement error. The best we can do is to estimate the impact of this upon the score we obtain, and there are established statistical tools that allow us to do just that. Rigidly, user of assessment results often fail to understand the implication of measurement error. They often overlook or ignore it. If student A has scored 60 points on a language test and student B has scored 52, user may assume that this is constraint evidence that student has a greater ability than student B. As this section will illustrate, however, this is not necessarily a reasonable assumption at all. There are several potential sources of measurement error and each affect the degree of confidence we can place in the accuracy of result. These sources of error include measurement using different tools, measurement of different occasions, measurement of different groups of assessee, and measurement by different individuals. If they have reasonable estimate of the amount of error, and understand how to interpret this information, user can gain a sense of how accurate score and grades might be as indication of the assessee abilities. Without this information, they can only guess. Measurement using different tools consistency. Just as some tape measure or scale are more accurate than others, there can be little doubt that language assessment can also be more or less accurate. Also, unlike tape measure, assessment are usually more accurate along a center limited strength of the range of ability than at the point above or below. This is as thought a tape measure and gain distance between 40 and 60 centimeters quite precisely. 56.3 centimeters, 48.1 centimeters, but could only provide Razi estimate of above about 25 centimeter or 30 centimeter or at least 80 centimeter for distances outside this range. A, a complicating factor in that we have no dependable yardstick to help us judge as how accurate our language assessment are. If our watch is show different times, we can check them again a word clock on the internet. If our weight scale disagree, we can use a standard way to check which is accurate. Suddenly, there is no generally accepted gold standard measure of language ability. When they measure exactly the same qualities, we can translate results between different measurement scale by applying a simple calculation, kilograms to pound in weight, Fahrenheit to Celsius in temperature, and construct the weight or temperature. The concept of language ability itself is understood to rather different ways by individual teachers or test developers. According to their beliefs and intentions, teacher may use different assessment methods in different combination to measure abilities and arrive at grades. Translating from one perspective to other may not always be possible, and this causes obvious difficulties for the users of assessment results. Content sampling. Even where two assessments are intended to measure the same knowledge, skills, or abilities are built to exactly the same specification and re-administered to the same people at the same time. In other words, where two forms of the same assessment are combined, there will be differences in the result. This is because each form can only deal with a very limited selection of the language to be assessed, and it is matter of change how far the sample that is chosen match each learner limited knowledge. To illustrate sampling issue, let's say a teacher gives class a group of 20 students, an informal test or quiz based on 1,000 words they are supposed to have learned. To check whether the student know the words, leaving aside the tricky question of what it actually means to know a word. He could give them a quiz made up at 1,000 questions. 1 point is available for each correct response. If all students perform to the best of their ability and manage to stay awake, this quiz would show the teacher exactly which of the words each student knows, but it would also take too much time and midfold the need of practicality and efficiency. He might decide that a quick 10 items quiz based on a random selection of the words should be enough to tell him which student know, now know most most of the words and which do not. In fact, although the teacher doesn't know this, each student has learned a random selection of exactly half of the words. In this scenario, taking the quiz is rather like asking each student in the class to flip a coin 10 times, as each student effectively has a 50% chance of knowing each of the words on the quiz. As all the students know 50% of the words, you might expect most of them to get 5 questions right out of the 10. But if you leave your coin 10 times, it's not particularly likely that you got 5 hands. Only about 25% or 1 in 4 people get this result. Most people, 66% or two-thirds, will find they get 4, 5, or 6 heads. So for most of Class A, the score of 4, 5, or 6 thoroughly reflect that they know about half of the words. According to the laws of probability, however, there is a good chance that one or two students might score 7 points and one or two might score 3 points. There is also a good chance that at least one could be very lucky or very unlucky. In the sample of the words on the quiz, there is about a 4% chance, just less than in 1 in 20, that a student who knows just 500 of the 1,000 words would actually score. 8 out of 10 is similar chance that one would score 2 out of 10. It wouldn't be astonishing if one scored 10 or 0. Now, let's imagine the teacher gives the same quiz to a second group of 20 students, Class B, but in this group, each student only knows 250 of the words. Based on probability, each student in this class has roughly a 25% chance of success on each question. So we should expect that over half, or 53% or 11 of students, they score either 2 or 3. On the other hand, we could expect 4 or 5 students to get a score of at least 4 out of 10, and there is a fair chance that one student might be able to score 6 or more. If the teacher decides to recognize his classes on the basis of this quiz, placing those scoring 3 or below into a lower level and those scoring 4 or above into a higher level class, we would expect to see around 7 of the 40 students going into the wrong class. Even if we increase the distance is the probability of success in the different groups, let's say that in Class A, students all know 750 words, there are still likely to be learners in Class B who will perform at least as well on the quiz as the lowest score in Class A, simply because of the choice of word on the quiz. Happily for the teacher, there are ways to improve reliability. One is the increasing the number of questions. Of course, 1,000 questions would make the picture very clear, but even 100 questions would be enough to minimize the possibility that member of Class A might be confused with members of Class B. It is unlikely but not impossible that anybody in Class A would score less or that anybody in Class B would score more than 35 out of 100. On the other hand, taking a representative sample of the full range of language abilities is usually a much more complex position than one facing these teachers, even when very effort is made to minimize quality. Precision is very difficult, time-consuming, and closely to achieve. Measurement on different occasions is stability. A problem when trying to measure people's physical characteristics like height, weight, and foot size is that this can fluctuate significantly. By the late evening, people may be as much as 2 centimeters shorter than when they wake up in the morning. Mental abilities also fluctuate, being affected by the time of day and physical condition. Performance on tasks of all kinds is affected by alertness, health, and mood. This means that even if we were able to administer identical and perfectly accurate language assessment on different occasions, without learners recalling the answer they gave the first time around, we would still see differences in the learner score on each occasion. And it is not only people abilities that change over time. If we don't very carefully control the condition on each occasions that we administer an assessment, that experience may be very inconsistent. Uncomfortable heat and traffic noise might make the afternoon listening test session more difficult than the morning when it was cool and quiet. If the teacher of class K allows her student 10 minutes longer to complete their writing assessment than was allowed for student in class J, they may produce better work even though they have the same level of ability in writing. Holding condition constant can help to make result more reliable, but it can also be very limited. Using only strictly controlled tasks for assessment in class can rule out the use of more creative, unpredictable task type and restrict the role of the teacher to that of an invigilator, preventing from taking formative opportunities to investigate student difficulties or to help them learn from and improve on their performance. In reality, when tasks are used by teacher, there will be inevitably be a good deal of variability in conditions, balancing the negative effect on reliability from this variation over the course of a few weeks or months. The teacher generally have numerous chances to observe what a student can do. This means that they gathered far more evidence of student abilities than would be available from most tests. It has been argued that this broad sample of unassessed abilities may upset the limited reliability of the individual assessment tasks made by teacher Black and William, 2000. Measurement of different individuals' test taker characteristics. Differences in performance over time are closely related to the personal attribute of assessee. What Bachman and Palmer 2010 called assessee characteristics. These were divided by O'Sullivan and Green 2011 into three categories: physical or physiological, psychological, and experiential. Physical or physiological characteristics include along with short-term illnesses and injuries. Longer terms, disabilities that might impact upon test performance, such as poor eyesight, causing difficulties in reading the test materials, and stable biological characteristics such as gender. Psychological characteristics also include relatively short-term issues such as concentration and mood together with more stable characteristics such as personality type. This characteristic can play a major part in performance on assessment. For example, some individuals suffer from such debilitating anxiety when taking tests that they may be unable to participate, while others seem to respond very positively to, to test condition. Every effort should be made to put assessee at their ease so that they are able to perform to the best of their ability. In Table 4.2, the experiential characteristics include language background. Speaker of different languages encounter different kinds of difficulty when learning a target language, and educational experience such as experiment of learning language or previous practice with a certain type of assessment. General knowledge is also likely to contribute to performance. Knowing sometimes about the topic of a recording might help an assessee to perform well on a listening test. Learners with little experience of using a language of communication will struggle to respond to a self-assessment questionnaire based on a real-world language use. For example, assessee will find it much easier to respond yes or no to a statement on a self-assessment questionnaire such as I and make a complaint about simple matters. For example, the light in my room doesn't work. Association of Language Tester in Europe 2002. If they have experience of similar situation, constructing groups of assessee, men and women, adults and children, may have different amounts and different kinds of knowledge about the world. Differences between assessee affects estimate of the reliability of measurement. When assessments are administered to more homogeneous group, they produce more reliable results. When different populations of assessee are involved with different areas of strength or weaknesses, it is not straightforward to rank them and results tend to be less consistent. In an assessment that includes the use of articles in English. For example, if all the test takers are speakers of French or Spanish, language that have article system, the results are likely to be more consistent than if the French and Spanish test takers are joined by speakers of Turkish and Russian, speaker of language that do not have article system. Generally, low-scoring French assessee may perform rather well on the question involving articles, while otherwise high-scoring Turkish assessee might perform relatively poorly on same question. Some difference in performance associated with test taker characteristic may actually be relevant to decision the test user wish to make. For example, a Japanese learner of Chinese is likely to have an advantage over a Thai learning in a reading test because the Japanese written system is based on Chinese characters, but the Thai is not. However, this advantage also applies in the real world. Japanese people can read and understand many signs written in Chinese without speaking the language. The test simply reflect this natural advantage. Other characteristics may affect performance on assessment but not affect performance in the real world. This will be distort the picture given a real world abilities. It has sometimes been found, for example, that teenage boys tend to perform a little better when grades are based on one of tests that use multiple choice question, while girls perform better when grades are based on regular homework exercises. Murphy, 1982. A multiple choice test may tend to advantage boys, but real life language use does not usually involve choosing answer A, B, or C, and so the advantage is probably just down to the test format and not relevant to the purpose of the assessment. Limiting the range of format used for assessment the multiple choice question may therefore introduce a small but systematic bias in favor of boys as a group, but the advantage will not necessarily apply to individuals.